Howdy folks, Chris LaRose here of LaRose Hat Co. And today is kind of an informal video. I'm working on a project that's going to take me a long time. So I'm making about 100 of these little hats that will be going on to 100 of these birds. So for you involved with the train community, at least online, I'm sure you've probably heard of a YouTube channel called Heis, in which they talk about trains and railroading and all sorts of stuff. And it's a really cool group of fellas that, you know, work together doing that stuff, I believe out in Colorado. And they asked me to make these little hats for their bird mascots. So what I'm doing this week is I'm cutting out all the little pieces, which is quite a long and arduous task. It's gonna take me probably the whole week to do it, but it gives me a lot of time to talk about some cool stuff or think about it. So join me as I do all the prep work that nobody likes to do. It's funny that in the PA Dutch world, they say sharpening the knife is half the job, and I really believe that's true. Because, you know, like if you're painting a building or something like that, half the job is all the prep work that doesn't feel like you're getting anything done, and you don't really feel like you're doing anything till you actually get to the painting part. But it made me think about a topic I wanted to talk about, which was the idea of fast fashion and vintage clothing. And what brought this to mind is that I've always known I've liked vintage clothing, but I never consciously made the connection that I wear vintage clothing every day. I've known that I wear vintage clothing, I just didn't know how much of it I was wearing until I was talking to somebody today on the idea of fast fashion. And I said that vintage clothing is probably one of the more sustainable things in the world, in terms of not having mountainous landfills of polyester clothing that get worn once and thrown away. So I went through what I was wearing in that conversation. I'm like, well, the shirt I'm wearing is from Woolrich from 1938. The pants I'm wearing are U.S. Army from 1943. The boots I'm wearing are 1966 dated jungle boots from the U.S. Army. So just in those three garments, I'm wearing clothing that averages about 75 years old, which is kind of fun to think about, that I'm wearing something that's been around, you know, a couple generations, and it's still good and still, you know, sought after. And then I think about how a lot of people these days in, you know, in the modern world are wearing polyester stuff, you know, polyester clothing that is usually driven by marketing. So they'll buy something because the marketing convinces you you need it, and then you wear it for, you know, a month or two, and then it'll languish in the back of your closet until you clean it out a couple years later and be like, I don't think I need this, and either donate it or throw it away. And it just makes me realize how much waste there is in the modern world when it comes to clothing and how people think about clothing. And it also makes me realize how the perspective on clothing in the past 50 years has changed. So, for example, back in the 50s and 60s, it would have just been commonplace to think of going to a cobbler to have your shoes made or repaired, or going to a tailor to have a suit made or repaired, or just knowing how to do it yourself if you had the time to put into making that stuff. And nowadays, that's almost unheard of. I mean, I can't think of many people that I know that say, you know, oh, I have a tailor. That's pretty crazy. I think maybe I've met one or two that say I have a tailor. And then these are usually people who need one, you know, who are, you know, tall and just have to have their clothing made for them. But if they're going to have it made for them and have it be expensive, then they get it done really nicely and exactly what they want. So it's interesting to see that we've lost a lot of those trades because of fast fashion. And the other thing I didn't realize is I heard it from a video that I was researching this by watching, and they were saying that in 1960, people spent an average of 10% of their income on clothing. And the example that the video gave was in 1960, a dress would be the equivalent of about $550 today, which seems crazy to a lot of people. That seems unheard of. But back then, they also said in that video that the average person bought about 25 garments a year. And that nowadays, the average person buys 70 garments per year, which seems absolutely absurd to me. And I'm sure there are a lot of people out there who are going to be like, oh, I don't spend 10% of my income on clothing and I don't buy 70 garments a year. And I totally get it. But, you know, you got to go off of averages if you're trying to compare decades, you know, 1960s to today. And I think if you talk to a lot of people, a lot of modern people, and said the idea of buying clothing, like buying fewer garments, but much, much more expensive garments, I think people nowadays would have a lot to say against that. I think if you walked up to the random person on the street and took like 1950s equivalent on goods, or you know, maybe even late 1800s a cost on a shirt or a pair of pants. If you walked up to somebody today and said, hey, how would you feel about buying a $300 dress shirt? I feel like a lot of people would complain about that. Now me, since I've started sewing for a living, and I realize how incredibly much time goes into doing this stuff, that like a dress shirt could easily take 2 full days of work. When I think about a dress shirt costing $300, I'm like, oh wow, yeah, that's super reasonable. Because I'm looking at it from the perspective of, I'm gonna buy this thing and wear it for 20 years, as opposed to most modern people who probably think about, I'm gonna buy this thing and wear it for a year till I get bored with it and throw it away and buy another one next year. And of course they're gonna want their shirts to be 40 bucks. But when you think about the actual labor that goes into it, it's pretty astounding that we even live in a world that there are things made in China that take a laborer 8-10 hours to do, and you can buy it for 10 bucks. I just think about that a lot, because oftentimes, you know, I get people asking about hats, and they'll ask the price of my hats, and I say, you know, they're $75. I sew them all one at a time, made to order. I sew them all custom. I use the highest quality materials I can possibly find, which takes a long time to even locate this fabric so I can even buy it and then use it. But you're getting a handmade, super high quality material, custom, made to order hat to your specifications and wants, you know, to what you want. And I have a lot of people that complain about the hats being $75. And they're like, well, the hat I'm wearing cost me $6. I'm like, yeah, that's great, but I feel bad for the person who had to make it for $6. Because somebody had to spend the time doing this. There's a lot of stuff out there that can be, you know, partially machine made, but still, in the end, no matter how much of it's done with a machine, there's still a human being on the other end who has to sit there and assemble all the stuff and has to learn the skills of that trade to be able to do it nicely. So there's still the human element in it. And I just think it's better to have more of a human element involved with the things that you buy and use, because it's more sustainable in the long run. You're supporting your neighbors, you're supporting your state, your town, your country. You're supporting another human being who is then in turn supporting you and appreciates what you contribute to society. So I think it's a big deal. And I think modern society has gotten used to deflated pricings from import goods and no longer realizes how much work is really behind an item. Like how many hands had to be involved in the item that you buy, from clothing to a refrigerator to your car, you know. I guess that's probably all I got. I like thinking about it because I feel like if we can learn to appreciate the human element more, then I think the world would become a better place. I think people would buy less stuff, buy nicer stuff, probably end up saving a lot of money, because when you buy one really, really good thing that you don't want to replace, you're not buying 100 junky things that don't last 6 weeks. It just seems like a better investment in the future of civilization. And there's something really nice about knowing what you're getting and the person it came from. Like, for example, there's an ATM in front of my bank that I can drive up to and deposit a check into, and it drops it into my bank account. Actually, I'm sure there's probably an app. I'm sure there's an app that I could take a picture of a check and deposit it into my bank from this table right here. But anytime I get a check from a customer for a hat, I like to go to my bank and walk in there and, you know, sign it and fill out the paperwork and talk to the teller, ask them how their day was, talk about the weather, you know, all that goofy small talk stuff. But it's still nice to be engaged in life around me and to not let convenience trap me into a life that 20 years down the line I might find myself really disgruntled and distressed and not know why. And it's because there's the lack of the people in it. I think Kurt Vonnegut said that too once. He talked about finishing a book and his editor saying, well, just fax it or email it or whatever. And then Kurt Vonnegut said, well, I wouldn't be able to walk down to the newsstand to buy a stamp and talk to the newsstand guy, and I wouldn't be able to walk past the hot dog seller on the way to the post office and talk to the people at the post office. So it's exactly the same thing. So there's my rant for you for the day. Talking about how fast fashion and imports and convenience all affect our lives in ways that we probably don't think about a whole lot, and that I have a whole bunch of extra time to think about all this stuff while I'm cutting out 100 tiny little hat brims. And the next step will be turning them all right side out and then stitching around them. And yeah. So thanks for watching, folks. I hope you like thinking as much as I do, because it is a wonderful world in there. Yeah. Let me know your thoughts. I'd love to hear what people think about this stuff. Like, do you like the idea of fast fashion? Or do you wish we could get back to something different? Back to the days where we had tailors and cobblers and blacksmiths and craftspeople. Yeah. Let me know. Take care, folks.